This video is going to be a few thoughts on how to go from zero to a finished, humorous, science fiction or fantasy novel like Terry Pratchett's Discworld universe or Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books. I'm a traditionally published author, in print even. I've written over a dozen novels. I've spoken on writing at conferences like Dragon Con, Milton Literary Festival, tons of others. I've also done a lot of self-publishing. I'm going to lay out a step-by-step process to do all those things, or at least some stuff that I think is important along the way. But the first thing that you should know is that the only reason to start this journey is that you want to do it for the love of it. If the thoughts of money or a career are in your head, I don't want to tell you that's not possible, because anything is possible. But because of the way that mega corporations, and I'm speaking about Amazon in particular here, because of the way they've destroyed the business of literature, it is very hard to make any money. And if you'd like to read how that happened, I can recommend Cory Doctorow's book, Choke Point Capitalism. In order for people to enjoy the funny moments in your work, they have to read those moments. And they will not do that if they get bored or confused. Now, we'll get to the boring part in a minute, but avoid the confusion part by learning the shape of a story. Making the story funny is probably foremost in your mind right now. You know, the whole reason that you want to write your idea is probably because you have some ideas for funny scenes. These are good things. But the problem is that those funny moments are useless without good underlying structure, because without the structure, nobody will read into your work long enough to get to those funny moments. Think of your funniest moments like the best parts of a party. Yeah, they're important, but you also have to make sure that people come to your party. To me, 3-act structure is the easiest to understand, but just know all of the different story structure description methods are basically saying different words about the same things. You know, imagine a group of people standing around looking at a mountain and saying, oh, you know, that part is called a couloir, and another person's like, oh, no way, that part there is called a chimney. The mountain doesn't care what you call it. It's the same mountain. So don't get bogged down in whether it's 5 acts or 3 acts or hero's journey or Harmon's hero's journey. The differences only matter if they help you understand it more easily. I wrote outlines over and over again. And in order to help make the process a little more fun, I started a podcast called The Outliners, and I invited fellow authors to write novel outlines with me from scratch. I did that until I could pretty much write a working outline in my sleep. If you manage to finish your manuscript and you haven't understood structure, nobody's going to enjoy your jokes because they won't be able to get through the story. They will get confused or lose interest and stop reading. And when you ask them what they thought, they'll say, it was great, and nothing else. Once you understand your structure, write an outline of how your story will go. This will probably change, and it's fine if it does, but have an outline. Get the literature and latte software Scrivener. They are not sponsors. They've not given me any money or anything. I just like it. One of the reasons I like Scrivener is that every day you start where you left off. I wrote my first novel in MS Word, and it starts you out every day at page 1, which means I wasted an hour every day rewriting my first paragraph instead of making progress. Also, Scrivener's word count tool is pretty great. Pick a daily word count target and hit that target every working day. When you can confidently hit that target, double it until you get to about 1,000 words per day. I was up to 5,000 a day at one point, but it was incredibly selfish of me because I wasn't spending any time with my wife or helping out around the house. It's up to you how long you want to make your novel. I think somewhere between 60 and 70,000 is probably the minimum you want. You know, Pratchett's novels got longer than that over his career, up to maybe 120,000 or so, but you don't have to go that far. Hitchhiker's Guide was only 46,000. Your call. In the first third of your novel, you will probably have a lot of fun, easy days of writing, and this is because you're spending all day opening new lines of thought, describing characters, inventing new things for them to do. Toward the end of your book, you will hate yourself for having so much fun in the beginning because you have to eventually tie up all those loose ends and make them make sense together. Tying up a whole series is even harder and more terrifying, which is why even legendary pros like Robert Jordan or George R.R. Martin don't seem to be able to manage it. Maybe they should hand Game of Thrones to Sanderson. Why not? It can really help to have a working outline, as I said before, but don't be surprised if you don't really know exactly what the story is until you're a third into writing it. And edit your outline to reflect what you discover as you write that first third. In the second third of your novel, you'll probably get lost. Who the hell are these characters? What the hell are they doing? And oh my God, am I going to have to make all this make sense? This is where your outline is key. It should be pretty solid by this point. And as you go further in, trust the choices that you made in the first third. The last third is just a ton of work. Making everything make sense, making it make sense together is daunting. And it's also scary to think about the fact that if you actually call your novel finished, someone might read it and have thoughts about it. This is without question the hardest part of the process. Finishing the work and letting it go out into the world. You will feel better as an artist if you finish projects. Yes, people will judge your work. They might even be unfair about your work in the comments, or worse, they might leave a shitty comment that proves that they didn't understand what you were doing at all and maybe didn't even read it. But all of that is better than hiding from these things by not completing work. You must finish your novel. Here's a little experiment. Write down every physical thing you know about your favorite characters in your favorite story. What they look like, what they wear, their hair, their eyes, everything. Then go back and reread your favorite story. I think that you will discover that as the reader, you aren't actually told that much about that character. I mean, yeah, you have an accurate picture of what that character looks like in your mind, and the story probably gives you a detail or two over time, but maybe not as much as you remember. The fewer concrete details you include in your work, the more room you leave for other people to make those details up for themselves. And when you do that, they will like your writing more because they're actually liking their own imagination. In this sense, as a writer, you kind of have to give your story away. This is what people mean when they say show, don't tell. I think one reason people get into writing novels is because they want to feel a little bit godlike in creating a world. And that's fun, especially in the beginning, when you don't have to tie up all the loose ends. But good writing is really a bit like a guided meditation. The more that you try to control the experience for the reader, the less they'll like it. And the more room that you leave for them, the more that they will like it. So writing is a giving art. As much fun as it might be to describe a badass character's badass armor and badass sword and how they badass around, every word you spend doing that is turning readers away because you're not letting them make up those details themselves. Once you have a few days of work done, compare what you have written with your favorite author's work and pay special attention to the way that they introduce characters and places. I think you'll see what I mean. And because you've tried this yourself a few times, you'll be able to look at the situation with new eyes. Let's take a look at an example here from Pratchett. This is from Guards. If you haven't read the book, you should. I'll link it below. But pause here and read this passage. 2 characters and a setting are all introduced here, but the only details we get are the ones we absolutely need. Carrot's physique, the cave height, Dad's helmet rivet. There's nothing about Carrot's clothes, nothing about Dad's armor or weapon outside of the helmet, nothing about the rock walls of the cave, nothing about dank walls or dim passages or how the room smells. There's a tiny bit of telling here when Pratchett tells us what the rivet twiddle means, but the next time the twiddle is mentioned, he doesn't tell us again. We're trusted to remember. And yet, when you read this, you're picturing Carrot and Dad probably dressed and probably what the cave looks like and maybe even smells like. You're adding all those details, and Pratchett is letting you. He gave you the room to do that. Your work needs to be streamlined like this, especially in comedy. And if you want to write Tolkien or Martin or Jordan-style fantasy, you can maybe get more into that stuff. But for comedy, keep it extremely light. Editing and writing are like 2 competing types of magic. If you try to edit too much as you write, they will cancel one another out and you will work yourself into a standstill most people call writer's block. Give yourself the space to dig ideas out of the garden without comparing every vegetable that comes up to some ideal gourmet dish. Editing is for later, after you've gained some distance. Hit your word count every day, even if you're writing absolute drivel that you know you will edit later. If you have to purposely, write nonsense, do that. That's your editor's problem. Even if your editor is just you a few weeks from now, it's still that person's problem and not yours. Once you have your basic story written and all the structure works, you can go back and try to punch up scenes to make them funnier. You probably thought of some funny stuff along the way, which is good too, of course, as long as it fits in the overall structure. But punching up after the fact allows you to write jokes that pay off much later in the work or include callbacks, that sort of thing. Whereas your daily writing might only include jokes that reference that day or a day before. I realize this is a guide on how to write funny novels, and it's mostly about everything else. It's just that everything else is so critical, and it all has to be, in order even to get to your funny moments, let alone appreciate them. In general, I highly recommend, once it's done, that you do not tell anyone your book is funny. Let them discover it for themselves. Just going by titles, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy could have been a serious space opera like the Expanse series. Pratchett's Guards could have been a gritty book like Joe Abercrombie's The First Law series. We don't know from the titles. Don't title your book like The Wacky Wizard or Silly Buggers the Night. Don't put anything in the blurb about it being funny. If people discover humor inside, great. But if you tell them before they read it that it's funny, they will go into the work with their arms crossed mentally, as if to say, okay, Mr. Funny Man, I'll be the judge of what's funny. Retain that element of surprise for yourself. Just say it's a great book and whatever it's about. If commenters or reviewers say it's hilarious or rollicking or whatever, that's fine. But don't say it about yourself. I think you'll make readers kind of tense up. Most of us, starting out, are relying on friends and family for feedback. This is good because they'll probably be supportive, but bad because the feedback will probably not be actionable. If your friends and family are reading your work and then you ask them what they think and they say, it was good, or give you some other, flavor of vague feedback, it's probably because they simply don't know what to say. And most likely, as a new writer, and keep in mind I'm saying this with love because I've been there, most likely you have either bored or confused them and they haven't read your whole book. They probably don't know how to say that, and they might blame themselves or they think they just weren't focusing enough or they're not being a good friend or whatever. Let them off the hook. You should find a way to get feedback from someone who is respectful, but also experienced enough to have an idea where you're going wrong. This might cost money. You might look around for what some people call a developmental edit. That's a more conceptual type of edit than a line edit, which is in turn a slightly more conceptual edit than a copy edit, which is just grammar and syntax. So punctuation is copy editing, stuff like sentence and paragraph flow is a line edit, and overall structure and premise type choices are a developmental edit. A lot of editors won't do a developmental edit at all because at a certain point of developmental editing, they're writing the book, not you. That said, a lot of times when you get a line edit, editors will help you see where things aren't connecting. They might not want to commit to doing a developmental edit as such, but they'll probably also be willing to share developmental thoughts alongside the line edit. Getting a novel edited by a pro is expensive. I've paid thousands, and it's pretty daunting to spend months or years on a manuscript and then get it back from your editor with a rash of red edits. But it's also valuable to get feedback from someone who has seen a lot of novels before yours. Often new writers argue with rejection or people passing on their work. It's hard not to when you feel like you've spent a lot of time with your work and you know it better than anyone. A lot of times you're going to get notes from people who are rejecting you and the notes won't make any sense. And it's deeply frustrating, but it's part of the game. Never argue with notes. You can ignore them on your end if you want, but never argue. Thank people for them and move on. Getting published was unbelievably hard when I did it 10 years ago, and it's harder now. If you absolutely must be a traditionally published author, I recommend you find ways to meet people in the publishing industry in person. In my opinion, don't bother cold querying lit agents. Querying literary agents via email is like trying to get a fish's attention with a cup of water. Now, there might be young literary agents out there accepting unsolicited pitches via DMs. I don't know. But if it were me, I would try to make some kind of relationship in person and then reach out. I know this sucks for those of us who don't live in New York City. It's the same in film. You need to be in LA. I don't like it either, but that's where the industry is. You're probably going to have to do stuff like attending writing conferences, volunteering, maybe volunteering at a publishing house if you can get that. Some festivals offer paid sit-downs with literary agents where they read your query and tell you what they think. I have done that, and to be honest, I walked away feeling like it was a waste of money. But if you go to that kind of conference long enough, you might make some valuable contacts. Regardless, it will be years of legwork and networking. I know someone who ran a major book festival for a decade until he got his novel published. If you're committed to polishing a single work that long, you'll probably end up with a very good novel. I don't have that kind of attention span, but maybe you do. Personally, I prefer just self-publishing and then going on to the next project. I'd rather be adding to a completed library of work than to be sitting on a single unfinished, unreleased idea waiting for a publisher to notice me. There are a lot of people much more noticeable than I am. In my case, I got published because I knew someone who got a job reading for a publisher. I knew that person because I joined a lot of writers groups and I met everyone I could. So in a way, it kind of happened by accident, but I also joined and participated in those groups hoping to make important contacts, so not that much of an accident. In general, in my opinion, your best strategy for standing out is staying in. You might be tempted to try to stand out as an author by writing the wackiest book ever. You might try to combine two genres or think of a wild magic system or whatever. Let me stop you. Every other author has thought of that too. Instead, I recommend you stand out by never giving up. Most people are going to quit this. Most are going to quit before they finish their first novel. Lots of people write one book, check the box, and don't do it again. Stand out by staying in. I recommend you pick a genre and write a book straight up the middle for that genre. Make it easy for people to get into your world. If you build a readership, you can be challenging later. Don't harm your chances of being read by trying to stand out in the work. Instead, stand out by being consistent, finishing stuff, and improving as you go. You can do this. It is hard, but like I said at the beginning, we're doing this because we love it. So let's try to love it. If I can help, let me know.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, like and subscribe, and maybe jump on the Patreon if you want to help me make more. And if you want to talk about comedy writing with people who are trying to do it in a constructive way, we also have a Discord channel.